Hello, football fans in Hamilton from coast to coast and around the world. This is the fifth quarter show with myself. We're on YouTube, and we're going to have a lot of fun tonight talking about two distinct topics and many more if you want to bring them up. Number one, the search for the next general manager of the Hamilton Ticats. Number two, we talked about it in the weeks before the playoffs even started, and that was who are our free agents? Which players could the Ticats lose? Which ones do they want to definitely retain? And who else is out there that is available this offseason? Well, I've done a number of days worth of research when it comes to free agency, when it comes to the next GM of the Hamilton Ticats, and we're going to discuss it for the next hour or so, however long you want to go. And as usual here on the fifth quarter, it is interactive. You can jump in the chat and offer your thoughts, and I already see some comments coming in. You can click on the link in the chat and join me live on the show. Pepper me with questions or offer your suggestions on who should be the next Ticats GM and who should be the players that this organization goes after in free agency. I'm going to give you as well my list. I have one free agent. It's a wish list, but one free agent from each team that the Ticats should definitely look at. I'm not sure any of the 9, to be honest, or 8 in this case, will be available because they are really good players, but some of them might be. The teams that they are currently with might say, the asking price is too much, or, we're going to go in a different direction, be it younger or maybe someone else on the team. So I'm going to give you my list of the 8 players who are free agents who would really look good in black and gold. And as far as the general manager talk goes, boy, oh boy, it has been quite the week already. And not only in Hamilton, but other places as well, namely BC and Edmonton. And it all kind of started with Ed Hervey leaving his role as general manager of the Hamilton Ticats after one season and going back home, if you will, to Edmonton to be their general manager. And kudos to Ed Hervey. He has been in that position with other organizations and is now going to the Elks, calling them a laughingstock. And I think he was not calling he wasn't pulling any punches. He's calling a spade a spade. That organization needs to get a lot better. So it's going to be interesting to see what Ed Hervey does in that role with Edmonton. And then Ryan Rigmaiden in BC, the new GM there, and the Lions then relieving Rick Campbell of his head coaching duties. And now everyone is speculating or wondering what is going to happen. Is Buck Pierce going to leave the offensive coordinator role in Winnipeg to be the head coach of the BC Alliance? He once played in BC. He would probably fit well with them. Or is he going to stay in Winnipeg with the job that he has? And who is going to be the next guy in Edmonton? Is it going to be Rick Campbell? There's a lot of smoke when it comes to that. There is a lot of talk about Orlando Steinauer, the president of football operations with the Hamilton Ticats. He had a lot of success as a head coach with the Cats, could not get them over the final hump in the Grey Cup, but won head coach of the year. He set an all-time franchise record for wins in his season, was well-liked in the locker room, and really likes coaching. There was a lot of talk, I think especially during Grey Cup week, that Steinauer really misses coaching, and why wouldn't he? I mean, he left his mark here in Hamilton, and to say he probably misses it might be an understatement. But is he going to leave a president role to go be a head coach in another market? Now, BC makes sense. Close to home. He's from the Pacific Northwest in the United States. Geographically, it makes sense. From a career maneuver perspective, that would be, I don't know if it would be unprecedented, but we haven't seen that in a long, long time. Leaving a president's role to go to be a head coach would be very interesting. Now, I will say this. I have reached out to the Ticats and I said, hey, is O available for an interview? And I would have loved to have him on the show tonight, but he wasn't available this evening. So we're going to try to get him on the fifth quarter show next week. I will give you plenty of heads up when we're going to have him on And I'll fire some questions his way. And one of them will be, hey, listen, do you still want to coach? And is BC a viable option? And I'm sure he's going to sidestep it or give us the answer that you probably expect. But it's a question that certainly needs to be asked because a lot of people are asking it around the Canadian Football League. So hopefully we get at least a little bit of an answer from Coach O. All right, so let's get into the general manager talk, and then we'll get into free agency. I'm kind of in that mode right now. The chat is on fire. I'm going to get to a lot of your comments here in the next couple of minutes. Fifth quarter show at gmail.com is the email address. You can see it in the scroll at the bottom. Fifth quarter show, the number 5th, fifth quarter show at gmail.com is the email address to offer your thoughts on free agency or the next GM of the Cats, who you think or who you want to be that GM. On X, at Rick Zamperin, use the handle, use the hashtag fifth quarter, or hit the link in the chat, or just send me a note in the chat. So here's what I know in terms of the general manager for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I have a couple of sources who have told me over the last number of days that Ted Govaya and Danny McManus, the super duo in Winnipeg, who have really been, aside from Kyle Walters, really been the thrust to improve the roster year after year after year in the Peg. Those two gentlemen really want to work in Hamilton. And, Danny Mac was here, obviously, as a player. He was here as a U.S. scout for a number of years. The guy that brought Delvin Breaux to town. I mean, he has an eye for talent, and so does Ted Govaya. For years, he was, not only in Winnipeg, but in Toronto as well, a guy who just uncovered those players who fit whatever system was being implemented by the head coach and the offensive and defensive coordinators or the special teams coordinators. And so these two gentlemen this is their dream job, to be the general manager in Hamilton. Now, can both come here? Theoretically, I guess you make one the GM and one, the director of player personnel. And certainly if they both came, the front office would drastically change. And maybe even if one came, the front office will drastically change. Because the GM is going to want their people around them and surrounding them. So if it's one or both, I think the Ticats front office looks maybe very different, or at least a little bit different come game number 1 next spring. My guess is that it is going to be one and not both. I'd love to see both. In fact, if the Ticats can make it work, let's do it. But I think, just looking at the situation, because there's obviously budgetary implications as well. You bring in 2 salaries as opposed to 1. If I were a betting man, I would bet that 1 would be here. And who that person is, whether it's Govaya or McManus, I don't know. It'll probably come down to the interview. I think DMAC is the guy that most fans would be able to relate to. Legendary player, right? Hall of Fame player. Won the last Grey Cup in Hamilton. Ted Govaya, while he doesn't have the on-field prowess or status that DMAC has, is a great football mind. So if you only get one, either one of those two guys would be amazing. Now, there's 2 other names that I have heard among the 8 or 10, apparently, that are being considered. One of them is Chris Rossetti. Chris Rossetti's a former front office person with the Toronto Argonauts, who's now with the New York Giants of the National Football League. And you're probably wondering, well, why would anyone come from the NFL to the CFL? It's not unprecedented. It has happened before. It will happen again. Not sure if Rossetti's going to be the next person to do that, but I've heard that he is apparently one guy that the Tiger Cats are considering. The other one is Vince Magri. Vince is also a former Argonauts front office guy, assistant GM, who is now with the Buffalo Bills in their scouting department. And word is that he is another guy that the Tiger Cats are looking at to potentially bring on board as a general manager to finally end this Grey Cup drought. So that's what I've heard on the GM front. And it's really interesting, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. By all accounts, this is going to be a relatively, I wouldn't say lengthy process, but they're going to do their due diligence, right? And Orlando Steinauer, who at this point in time is still the president of football operations, he's going to be the guy that I think ultimately says, all right, this is the team we're going with, and we'll see how it breaks down. All right, let's get to some of the comments in the chat. I'm just going to quickly check the email. The email is wide open. fifthquartershow@gmail.com is the email address. And on X, at Rick Zamperin, the hashtag is fifth quarter. So let's go to the commentary, and then I'm going to get into the free agents talk, the thrust of why we're hosting this show. And then this GM stuff kind of really propelled itself to the front page, so to speak. Green on the show, let's call him Green, saying, welcome home, Danny Mac. We want Danny Mac. We want Danny Mac. If the Cars, I'm pretty sure Green means to say if the Cats don't sign Keandre Smith, they are out of their minds. Carlisle says, did we lose the GM already? Had not heard he had been fired. So Carlisle, Ed Hervey was not fired. He left to go to Edmonton. So he was given permission to speak with the Elks. The Elks and their new CEO, Chris Morris, wanting to return to the roots of the franchise, being a winning franchise, welcomed Hervey back. And so that's how that went down. Ari says, I don't understand Wally Buono's role. He seems to be advising Scott Mitchell. Why does Mitchell need an advisor? To me, this is a hit at Orlando. So, yeah, great piece on Ticats.ca. Steve Milton, longtime Hamilton Spectator reporter, and now working with the Ticats, has a great article on Ticats.ca. And he mentions that Wally Buono is advising Scott Mitchell, and I think the Tiger Cats as a whole, about this process. And, I mean, why wouldn't you tap into a mind like Wally Buono, the all-time winningest head coach in the Canadian Football League, a guy who won championships as a general manager and a front office, director. I think it's great news. I don't necessarily think that's a hit on Orlando. I think it's just another excellent football mind at the table, advising, offering their thoughts on how the team should proceed. Now, the ultimate choice is going to be up to guys like Mitchell and Steinauer to say, all right, this is where we're going. Buono is going to give his recommendation or his advice in this scenario. I don't see that as a bad thing at all. Green says Orlando is no longer needed with the Cats. No, I would beg to differ. He's a really popular guy inside the locker room with the front office personnel. I mean, he's a player's coach, a player's front office guy. And I really enjoy being around him. He's got an infectious energy, a great smile, and obviously a hard worker, and has been successful at every position, every level he's been in. John says, will the new GM actually have full control of player personnel? Will ownership leave the GM alone? John, that's a great question. I mean, there have been owners with his franchise and other franchises in even other sports leagues that meddle, right? They got their fingers or their hands in the cookie jar and they want it to happen their way. Or they really want to lead how they see or really want the team to be led. So that's a good question. Is the ownership group going to hire a GM and then say, all right, you do everything? I don't know. That's a very good question. Because if it's the latter and the higher ups are always needling at the GM, number one, I'd hate to be that GM because you're always kind of deflecting or you're always trying to answer someone else's question or problem and you just want to do your work. FM says, here's my theory for our Cats. Free agents. Top of my list would be Beard, number one. Number two would be Dunbar, and then number three would be Smith. I would then add a vet or two cheap vets for wide receiver, and then get a D lineman or two, and then spend the rest on the linebackers and secondary. FM, that is great. And that will lead us into the free agency discussion. I'm sure if you still want to talk GM, yeah, we can do this. I'm around for another 45 minutes or even longer if you want to go. Let's bring in our first caller into the show, and it is Christian, who has joined us before and is back at it again. Christian, how are you?
Good, Rick. How are you?
I'm fantastic. What's on your mind this evening?
I want Jadarin Grant from the Argos.
You and everyone else. Yes. Do you think that's a realistic possibility?
If he's... Now, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What's his contract like?
So he is a free agent.
Okay. So
yes. He would be available.
Yes.
Okay, so
it's
you're
only
all.
looking positively for me.
So yeah, the question is, and I've thought about this week, especially kind of preparing for this show, and
Yes.
really took a long and hard look at two teams, and those being the last two teams who were still alive, Toronto and Winnipeg. Because in one case, the Argos, you have a team that has won the Grey Cup. They've achieved the pinnacle. So if you're a player who's now either won for the first time or won for the second or third or whatever the case is, are you satisfied and now chasing the money? You don't care where you play, you just want to play somewhere for the most amount of money. Or, again, in Toronto's case, do you want to run it back? Do you want to try to bring as many, and I'm talking from a player's perspective, and as many of your teammates back to try to do it again, knowing it's pretty hard to do so. And on the other side of the equation is Winnipeg, because they've been to 5 Grey Cup championships in a row. They won the first 2, both against Hamilton, and then lost the next 3. So the mindset, at least for me, from a player's perspective, is we all want to come back knowing that Winnipeg is hosting the Grey Cup. Do we all want to come back and try again? Or have they come to the realization that, if I'm chasing my last contract, I'm just going to go to whoever is going to pay me the most amount of money? That's where I'm sitting with at least guys like Janarian Grant, who's played in both cities.
That is a good point. But the reason why I want him is because he is so dynamic.
Absolutely. And even on the offensive side of the ball, which we saw in the Grey Cup, or especially in the East Final, and a little bit in the Grey Cup, but the East Final for sure.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's a great I would not say no to Janarian Grant, that's for sure.
No. And Lawrence Woods cannot do it for me on the return side of things.
Yeah.
He had one punt return, I think, but he wasn't dynamic enough for me.
Yeah, he had one punt return for a touchdown this season, but few and far between. Janarian Grant had 3 of those and a kickoff return. He was pretty good this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Christian, I'll let you go. Thanks for chiming in. Enjoy the rest of the offseason.
Enjoy the rest of the offseason, Rick. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is Christian here on the Fifth Quarter Show on YouTube. You can join us as well, clicking on the link in the chat. You can send me an email, fifthquartershow@gmail.com. Randy coming in with a comment on email. Randy says, "Hi, Rick. Kyle Walters may be a suggestion as he has done well in the CIS or U Sports, or perhaps a current former CFL player or university coach could join the front office. The Cats need to retain players, as the last few years has shown that too many have gone to other teams and not only done well, but burned the Cats in games. Can Wally Buono come out of retirement?" Randy in Oakville. Well, 2 things. I don't think Kyle Walters is going anywhere. He is firmly entrenched in Winnipeg, and if they keep going to Grey Cups, he's certainly not going anywhere. And Wally Buono, sadly, his only impact for the Tiger Cats will be, as far as I know, this advisory role when it comes to the search for a GM. But great suggestion. I'd love Wally Buono to be an official member of the Ticats front office. Let's get back to the chat, and then I'll reveal my 8 players, 1 from each team, 8 free agents. Again, 1 from each of the 8 other teams who I think would look amazing in a Ticats uniform. But let's go to Brad in the chat. Brad says, "There are times Scott needs a lobotomy, let alone an advisor. LOL." Okay. Randy also says, "I wonder if there's an NFL GM who would like to jump north of the border to Canada. I think Coach O could do a GM job." I think Coach O could do a GM job as well. He was the VP of football operations and then the president of football operations. And while more of a go-between between the other front office guys and the ownership group, I think Coach O would probably, still call him Coach O, I think O would do a pretty good job as a GM, but I don't think there's an NFL GM, unless they were Canadian, to say, and particularly from a CFL franchise, who they want to go back to and help win a Grey Cup. Unless, they were kind of reading the tea leaves in the NFL and thinking, "No, I'm not going to come back. Like the ownership's, I'm out of here. Let's make the jump." Otherwise, they're getting paid so much more money in the States. I mean, it's not even funny. You would just not leave a job like that. But hey, good suggestion anyways. Green says, "Get rid of Butler, sign Smith ASAP. Ari says, co-GMs has not worked well here." And I would agree with that. I'm not a big fan of the co-GM, right? We've had that here in Hamilton over the last couple of years, and before Ed Hervey was named the GM, he and I can't remember the other guys' names in Hamilton were all kind of co-GM. Drew Alamang was in there, director of Canadian Scouting. They all kind of shared the role. I think you need one voice and one kind of final stamp of approval to say, all right, this is what we're doing, right? Here's who we're signing. This is our game plan. Having that one voice, that one person that is going to lead the thrust into free agency and the day-to-day transactions that happen throughout the CFL season, you need that one person. Absolutely. FM says, Rick, question, not sure if you know this, but do you know if any coaches, besides Scott Milanovich, besides head coach, if any other coaches are signed beyond this year in terms of the Tiger Cats head coach or coaching staff? I do not believe so. These coaches are usually on a 1 year. It's extremely rare unless you bring in kind of a whole team or you hire a new head coach and he's got, let's just say, a 3-year deal. And perhaps he hires a couple of his coordinators on 2-year deals. But I'm just looking at the list right now, and I do not think anyone is on a multi-year contract. I could be corrected, but I don't think they are. So this coaching staff will probably look a little bit different, to be honest, next year than it did this year. I mean, the head coach is going to be, Scott Milanovich is going to be back. The defensive coordinator position is up in the air. Right now, they don't have a DC, although Chris Jones is kind of that by de facto. But does he come back? Does he go somewhere else? Is he going to be given a better opportunity in another CFL or even U.S. college kind of situation? I don't know. That could be a possibility. Dennis McKnight in special teams. He was a guy who came in for Paul Boudreau, who was not working in that role. Does he come back, or is the team, the general manager and the head coach, going to ultimately decide, listen, we got to go in a different direction? Does Scott Milanovich, because we asked him this question when he first came on as head coach, does he relieve the OC duties and is strictly a head coach? I'm going to think the way this offense played this year, I think he retains that role. I think he's got a good enough excuse, if you will, lack for a better term, to say, we were productive. I don't really want to mess with that. And if the players responded positively to how he was calling the game, either in the week of practice leading up to a game or during the game, there's probably not a need to change at all. So, we'll see how the coaching staff kind of shakes down. Brad says, Danny is still a Ticat at heart. John says, agree, RA, but Rick, will ownership leave them alone? Winnipeg did. That's a huge key. That's a huge key. Now, let's not forget, Winnipeg is a community-owned franchise that has a board of directors that hires all the higher-ups. And, they just leave them alone, and they've been successful. And I think the best teams are usually like that. Put the pieces in place from a front office perspective and everything, and, let them do their thing. And I think everything usually works out. And sometimes you'll hire an individual or a couple of people that it just doesn't work out. Even if you do leave them alone, it just, for whatever reason, the circumstances did not allow said individual or individuals to get the job done. It's no guarantee that if you leave them alone, everything works out. Sometimes ownership does have to get involved to say, hey, we're not moving in the right direction. Or really has to kick someone in the rear end to say, hey, we got to start winning some ball games here. That I can deal with. But the day-to-day minutia of front office dealings with teams and other, free agents, let your staff do what they got to do. So that's a good point. Ken says, how involved is the caretaker in reference to Bob Young? I think from a hiring perspective in the GM role, I think we'll have a say. I'm not sure how much Bob is going to weigh in because, this is and he's made mention of it before, and I'm sure he's learned a lot about the sport over his 20 years of owning the team. He has made mention time and time again that he hires people or allows people to be hired in other aspects of the franchise that, they're good at what they do. And certainly I don't think Bob is the one that is meddling in the day-to-day, playbook or implementation of a scheme for, for whatever the opponent is for that weekend. Randy says, I wonder if Mike McCarthy would leave his position at the end of the NFL and go to the Cats as GM. Mike McCarthy, the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? If that is the question, not a chance. No, not a chance. FM says, to answer the viewer's question earlier about the GM thing, Milton's article earlier, it says it will be clear that the new GM will be the football operations decision maker, fully empowered to run football ops, while reporting to Steinauer, who in turn reports to ownership. And that's how it should be. This is why you have a president of football operations, or in some cases, a VP of football ops. You have an ownership group. You have a president. And the line of communication is pretty straightforward. President to GM, that line has to be straight and solid, and no one else kind of gets in the way. And then GM to scouting staff, director of player personnel, Canadian scouting, U.S. scouting, you name it. That's the hierarchy. And then you have your coaching staff over here, head coach, coordinators, yada, yada, yada. The most well-oiled machines have that in place and have great people in those positions. And when you have that, you have a great foundation for a successful franchise. And so I think some of that, or a lot of that, has been missing in Hamilton over the last number of years. They've had some star performers in certain positions in the front office or coaching staff, but it all hasn't worked its way to a Grey Cup championship, sadly. Brad says the Cats can't even think about next season and free agents until they settle the GM issue. And that's correct. And listen, we're going to get into the free agency here in just a couple of seconds. But free agency, as we know, opens in February, right? So there's pretty much 2 solid months. You take out the holidays, kind of in there mapping out. I'm sure they've already had some discussions on who they want to keep, who they want to resign. We've all seen the demand, for lack of a better term, or the request, I guess, from quarterback Bo Levi Mitchell that he doesn't want to play on a prove-it contract in 2025. As you recall, he signed here in Hamilton a 3-year deal. It was worth about $500,000 per season. Year number 1, disastrous. He only played 6 games. He was hurt all the time. And so in that offseason, the Ticats went to Bo and said, listen, now we're gonna have you now play under a prove-it kind of contract. It's going to be about half the money we originally promised, and a lot of it is going to be built in as incentives. And well, lo and behold, he plays all 18 games. He starts 17. He breaks the franchise record for passing yards, leads the league in passing yards and touchdowns thrown, and now says, well, I proved it. I played every game. I was the MOP in the East. I was a few votes away from being the Canadian Football League's most outstanding player. Let's throw the prove-it contract in the garbage. Let's go back to the original deal. And so I don't blame him from doing that. In fact, I think he's earned that right. Being a future Hall of Famer, being a guy who's 30 plus, has been there, done that, won Grey Cups, won MOPs. I think this is a reward for what he did last year. So we'll see how that kind of shakes down. I don't think there's going to be a lot of friction in that regard. Okay, let's get to I just want to check the email real quick. Nothing in there. fifthquartershow@gmail.com, by the way, is the email address. Here's my free agents wish list. And before we get to that, I'm just going to go through the free agents for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. There are 24 of them. A list that is not as long as other teams. In fact, I believe the Ticats have the shortest number, or the fewest number, of free agents entering 2025. On offense, we have Brendan O'Leary-Orange, Stephen Dunbar Jr., James Butler, Harrison Frost, Ante Milanovic-Litre, James Tuck, David Beard, Joel Figueroa, Evan Johnson, Brandon Kemp, OJ Hilaire, Keandre Smith, Justin Marshall, Tyler Ternowski. 14 players on offense who are impending free agents. So come February, if they wish to do so, they will hit CFL free agency and go to the highest bidder or go to whatever team that they hope they can make an impact at. On defense, the free agents are Cam Dantzler, Will Sunderland, Richard Leonard, Jonathan Moxey, Trevor Hoyt, Carthel Flowers-Lloyd, Enoch McConzo, Nick Usher, David Bernard, Mario Kendricks, Reese Martin, and Deontay Knight. All right, so those are your free agents for this offseason. I have four high-priority free agents I think this franchise should re-sign. Whether you do it this week, whether you do it just before free agency, get these guys done. And in no particular order. I have Stephen Dunbar Jr., I have Ante Milanovic-Litre, David Beard, and Keandre Smith. 2 receivers, a backup running back who is a dynamo in short yardage. I know it was, 5 times on the goal line or whatever the case was. And David Beard, your center, who is one of the best offensive linemen, not only in the East, but the CFL as well. You'll notice none of my priority items are on defense. And I think while some of those guys will be back, I'm a fan of guys like Dantzler. I think, as a guy coming in and just playing on the practice roster, he had high praise from Jamal Peters. I take him for his word that Cam can probably play in the CFL. I'd love to see him try to prove that in training camp. In fact, he's probably going to be back at camp. Jonathan Moxey, I think, is versatile, can play linebacker and almost anywhere in the secondary. And maybe Nick Usher. And I say maybe because there was a stretch in the season that Nick was playing really well. I thought, wow, if we can get that each and every 18 games a year, this guy's going to be an all-star. But it was a little too up and down, so I'll put my Nick Ushers of the world kind of on the bubble. And so here are my 8 guys, one from each team in the CFL, that I would love to see in a Ticats uniform. And for some, maybe most on this list, it's probably a bit of a reach. It's probably a pipe dream. I got my rose-colored glasses, but they are free agents. And I think if they want to test free agency, the Ticats should put their best foot forward to try to get them in Tiger Town. From the BC Lions, receiver Justin McGinnis. Who would not want this guy? Can you imagine Tim White, Justin McGinnis, you re-signed Dunbar, you got Shamar Bridges coming off injury, Keandre Smith is your Canadian contingent at the receiver. Who's covering these guys? You thought the offense was good this past season. It would be explosive in 2025, and then some. From the Saskatchewan Roughriders, center Peter Godburn. I only have Peter on this list because if David Beard does go to another team, that's a big hole at the center position. I think Peter Godburn would be a great guy to fill in. Probably be tough to get out of Saskatchewan. I'm sure the Roughriders are going to try their best to re-sign him. But he's, I think, a year younger than David Beard, and I think would do a good job on the offensive line. From the Calgary Stampeders, linebacker Micah Awe. I know he's a little long in the tooth. He's just on the wrong side of 30. But he's had a fantastic CFL career. He would be a force in the linebacking core. And there is a need there for the Hamilton Tiger Cats at the linebacking position. From the Edmonton Elks, Niles Morgan, another linebacker, a hard-hitting guy, who had over 100 defensive tackles in 2024. He can go not only from tackle to tackle, but sideline to sideline. He's an athletic linebacker, and I really liked how he played this season, minus the hit against Luther Hakunavanu. From Winnipeg, and I know this is a pipe dream, but I'd love to see it. He's a Niagara Falls kid. Terrell Ford had a sensational season with the Blue Bombers. Love to see him in the Ticats secondary. I know it's not going to happen, but he would be my pick from Winnipeg. Even though I'd love to have Willie Jefferson, but he's 34. Even though he had an amazing Grey Cup, and I think if Winnipeg won that game, Jefferson was probably the MOP. From the Toronto Argonauts, I know I don't really want anyone from the Argos on the team, but hey, listen, I'm picking one player from each team. Wide receiver DeMonte Coxey. DeMonte had a phenomenal season. He's 27, got a great engine. He can stretch the field. He can be your deep guy. He can be your intermediate guy. He can do it all. He'd be a great addition to any team. From Ottawa, defensive back Damon Webb. We know that the secondary here in Hamilton needs to be retooled. Damon Webb had a great year with Ottawa. I know Darius Pickett is probably going to be available, and I'd love to have him. The injury status, though, I'm just not sure where he's going to be. And for the Montreal Alouettes, we need a kick returner. And I know Christian recommended Janarian Grant, who I think is going to be, he is a free agent, but really tough to get out of Toronto. I have James Letcher. James Letcher is a great kick and punt return guy who can help a little bit on your offense. Those are my 8 free agents from other teams, and my 4 priority Ticats re-signees, if you will, come free agents. Let me know what you think of those. And if they're all too pipe dreamy, certainly let me know. FM says, oh, I missed Ari. Where is Eric Tillman, writes Ari. He was supposed to lead the East Coast expansion franchise that hasn't gone anywhere. Ari, think he's still waiting for the Atlantic Schooners or Laval Henchmen or whatever they're going to be called to resurface. Eric had a lot of success as a front office guy, particularly in Saskatchewan, but a little bit here in Hamilton as well. Name from the past, that is for sure. Let's go down the list here. And Ari also says Harrison Frost re-signed the other day. He was added to the roster per CFL transaction page. I totally missed that. So Frost is re-signed. That is great. That's another free agent off the list. So we're now down to 25. Brad says, I'm sorry, but Fig needs to be retired. How many actual downs did he even play this last season? I think Joel Figueroa got into one game this year. And he was on the 6-game injury list time and time again. And it's unfortunate because he had a pretty good CFL career when he was healthy, but he just could not stay off the injured list. And so, yeah, I think he's not only done in Hamilton, but I think he's done, sadly, in the Canadian Football League, unless there's another team that sees something that they want to bring him on board. But I just don't see it happening, to be honest. John says, Rick is the best. So great this is happening regularly. And says, Bo has earned the right by not making the playoffs. Doesn't deserve a raise for any player. Sorry, team sport. So, John, you're against a raise for Bo Levi Mitchell. Wow. I don't know. I think you got to give him. Listen, if I'm Bo Levi, this is the last deal, right? Like after this coming season, 2025 comes and goes. If the Ticats win the Grey Cup, I know, it's a big if, but if they finally get the job done and end the curse, end the drought, whatever you want to call it, and Bo Levi is there and he's hoisting the Grey Cup over his head, you'd probably think that is it. He's going to retire. But what if it's like this season as well? He plays really well, but the Ticats don't win the trophy. I would think at 35, 36 years of age, he's going to say, well, Henry Burris played into his late 30s. Ricky Ray did. Trevor Harris is still going. I got one more contract in me. And so while he's made, a pretty good dollar figure over the last number of years as a superstar quarterback in the CFL, what's more important at this stage of his career? Right? Does he want to be, and anyone in this case, this is not just Bo Levi, but anyone in this case who is the highest paid player on a team that has not won a championship in a long, long time, and you're one of the straws that stirs the drink, is the motivation, get as much money as I can because, being a pro athlete, your career is so short. Or is the motivation, you know what, I'm going to take a little bit less because that means we can get some other guys to help us achieve this goal of winning the Grey Cup. And you look at, hockey is a great example of this because they also, are structured in a salary cap, much higher than what the Canadian Football League utilizes. But at the end of the day, there are players, young and old, who say, no, I want the most amount of money because you never know. You never know when I'm going to get hurt or when I'll get traded, even though there's no move clauses, or, when the status or the fortunes of this team could change in an instant. So I want the most money I can get. And I don't blame those guys for thinking that way. It is a business that is tied to a sport. But there are other guys, and I find them exceptionally special. I'm talking about the elite players. Sidney Crosby is probably the greatest example, who has never been that guy to say, I just want the highest contract in the league because I'm the best player. For him, it's been, pay me what I think I'm worth, but I also want to spread it around as well. So other guys get their share, and we can sign maybe some free agents who are going to help this team get to the promised land. It's worked out for Sid. He's won 3 Stanley Cups. In the Canadian Football League, the economics are much different. You might be able to get a guy for, and I'm talking about an elite guy, for $250,000. And while the salary cap in the CFL is about $6 million as opposed to the NHL, which is nearly $90 million. Certainly the math is much different. But when you're looking at ratio and the expectation of a starting quarterback, running back, whatever the case is, you want to get the most amount of production from those contracts that you're signing. That's what a lot of free agency is about, too. Got to make the math work. That is for sure. Ari says, pay Bo and then be aggressive. Target has to be defense. Get some leaders to add to what's already here. Matthew Betts and Wynton McManus. McManus is made for Tiger Cat football. I'd love to see Wynton McManus in a Ticats uniform. Absolutely, I would. You kidding me? You can give him all the toothpicks he wants. And I'm telling you, if he gets elected to the Canadian Football Hall of Fame, his bust must include a toothpick. That would be the cat's ass. That'd be amazing. Here are some of the other high-profile free agents from other teams. Matthew Betts was brought up. Yeah, BC, their top three, at least to my mind, that I'd love to see in a Ticats uniform would be, as I mentioned, Justin McGinnis, Matthew Betts, who I don't think is going anywhere, and Michael Couture, who is a center on that offensive line, has had a pretty good career. From Saskatchewan, I went with Peter Godber, just looking at the offensive line, and if Beard leaves, we need a center. But they also have guys like, and we're familiar with him, middle linebacker Jameer Thurman, as well as here's another guy we're familiar with, defensive end Malik Carney, who's only 29, had his best years as a Tiger Cat. He would look good in a Ticats uniform. In Calgary, I mentioned Micah Iway, the linebacker. They also have receiver Markin Michel, who's been a productive guy in the CFL for many years, and Jalen Philpott, who's 26. I don't think has hit his ceiling yet, and would be a nice addition as a Canadian receiver on any team. For Edmonton, I mentioned Niles Morgan, the talented linebacker. They also have Javon Leake, who would certainly fill the role as the special teams guy with any team, certainly here in Hamilton. Eugene Lewis, who's going to be 32 next year, but still so ultra productive, a big target, always over 1,000 yards. Has had, some injury issues, nothing substantial over the last number of years, although I think this past season he was on the 6-game injured list at one point. And Kyron Moore, who's a guy who has been, pretty good in the Canadian Football League, is on the right side of 30. I think it would be a good addition to the receiving core in Hamilton. With Winnipeg, cornerback Terrell Ford, defensive end Willie Jefferson, linebacker Adam Bighill also available. Receivers, they got a lot of receivers available. Kenny Lawler, who's going to be 31 next year. Dalton Schoen, who's 28, had an injury-riddled campaign this past season, as you probably know. And receiver and return man Lucky Whitehead, who's going to be 33 next year. And why am I bringing up ages as well? Well, it's something to consider, especially when you're a front office and you're thinking, who are we going to bring in? Where's our window at in terms of winning a championship? And when I look at Hamilton, I would think, the window's kind of wide open. I wouldn't put an end date on it because I don't think they're extremely close to winning a championship. When you put their roster up against teams like Toronto and Montreal and Winnipeg, and maybe Saskatchewan to a degree, I think Hamilton's just a little bit on the outside of that contender picture, if you will, at this point in time. That could change in a heartbeat, come free agency, as we know. In Toronto, Jake Ceresna, Wynton McManus, Deshaun Amos, and Royce Metier. And on the offensive side of the ball, DeMonte Coxey and Janarian Grant. In Ottawa, they have Darius Pickett, Lorenzo Malden, who we're familiar with in Hamilton, Michael Wakefield, defensive lineman who had a very productive season, and Javon Santos-Knox, another former Ticat. Damon Webb as well. On the offensive side of the ball, Devontae Dedman, Jalen Acklin, and Justin Hardy. And for Montreal, and again, these are all kind of key free agents. On the defensive side of the ball, defensive back Kabian Ento and Deontay Ruffin, and on offense, James Letcher and Keon Julian Grant, who would be a nice addition as well from the receiver position. So those are some of the guys, some of the marquee names that are on the free agent lists of every team. Let's go back to the chat. And again, you can email as well, fifthquartershow@gmail.com. If you want to join me on the show live, click the link in the chat. If you don't see the link, let me know and I can repost it for everyone as well. John says, don't think Tiger Cats have to offer anything. Contract signed until 2025. That might have been in response to another comment. Pardon me. Let's go to Pills. This is another, you guys are having a chat in the chat. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't have any leverage that I can see other than holding out. This is probably about Levi Mitchell's contract. Yeah, I don't see Bo being a guy holding out, to be honest. I think they'll come to some sort of agreement. Brad says, I also think it is time the CFL raise the cap more in keeping with the economy. Yeah, I would agree with that. But, one of the main drivers behind CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie, who, by the way, was on the fifth quarter show. We had him on just before the Grey Cup. If you missed it, go into the video section. You can check it out. One of the main drivers behind his nudging out of the position, if you will, was that when he took the job in 2017, you may have already read this or heard about this. One of his big kind of commitments to the ownership group or groups was that he wanted to double league revenues. He wanted to, that was his aim, to double league revenues. And well, by 2024, the pandemic didn't help, but by 2024, that had not been accomplished. And so team evaluations and league revenues haven't really risen to the amount that he thought they would. And I mean, there was a number of other factors in there as well. But I think until owners and ownership groups realize more revenue coming in, I don't think the cap is going to be going up. Let's not forget, CFL rosters, active rosters, are not growing anytime soon. CBA is up, I think, in 2026. So that might be the next opportunity for the CFLPA to say, hey, we want a little bit more. And wanting a little bit more always costs a little bit more. So if you're an ownership group, obviously with any company, you want to keep expenses at their minimum and try to grow the revenue at its maximum. It's the latter part of that equation that is getting harder to do. Because, and I was talking about this with Louis Butko on his Newsmakers podcast on CH earlier this week, and he was at the Grey Cup in Vancouver, and maybe many of you or some of you were there as well. And he said the average age of the fan at Grey Cup Festival and the Grey Cup game was like 50 plus. And so one of the big challenges of this league is to get younger and a younger audience in the stadium and watching on TV, and certainly consuming through radio and all the other mediums that go around, including a show like this. And until this league, if they can ever figure that out, how to grow the game at a younger viewpoint, to get younger fans interested in the CFL, and they're not all flocking to the National Football League or other sports or just other things in general. If they can figure that out, they're on to something huge. Absolutely. Because listen, when did we all become fans? When we were kids or teenagers. You just get ingrained in that. You become a fan with a parent or, an aunt or uncle or just a group of friends from school, or maybe you went as a class trip or whatever the case is. It's usually in your youth that you become fans of whatever. Sports team, musical group, you name it. That's usually how it works. And so the CFL has to tap into the younger generation, whether that's through a flag football league sponsored by the CFL, whether that's through, school curriculum programming that the CFL kind of drives into each province. I think there's work to do. Absolutely, there's a lot of work to do. But the other side of the equation is there's a lot of positive that can come with that. Some of that is going to be ultimately revenue down the road. Tough nut to crack. It's not an easy thing for sure. PKA says, pay Bo, get another key wide receiver, let Butler go. He is great, but costs too much. Build an O-line and D-line. Okay, some good thoughts there. PKA. James Butler, sadly, I say sadly because he's a fan favorite, is not going to be with the Tiger Cats next season. I really don't see it. Had a great year. Not this past season, but the year before. Didn't really play that much this past season as Greg Bell came in and kind of took over the reins. And even though that Butler got back in, he was never really as productive as he was in 2023. So I do see Butler somewhere else. Too good of a player, too good of a person not to be associated with a CFL team. I just don't see it here in Hamilton. Listen, he's a free agent. He can go wherever he wants. And this past season, I think, put a little bit of a bad taste in his mouth. And I think he wants to, you talk about a prove it contract. He's going to go somewhere and prove that he can still get it done. I'm sure of that. Sam says, who will be our next commissioner? Randy Ambrosie was great. We need someone does not give up the CFL. Yeah, this is $1 million question. Next commissioner of the Canadian Football League. You know, I'll only bring up his name because I think he's done a phenomenal job of launching a league, being in some part the face of the league, and seeing the league grow from day one. And the league I'm talking about is the CEBL. And the commissioner I'm talking about of that league is Mike Morreale. We know him. We love him. Former Tiger Cat, former Argonaut. Grey Cup winner. Guy has done it all on the football field. And now he's doing it off the field and near a court with the CEBL. And the league is growing and it's very successful. He might be, and this is not a knock against Mike at all, he might be a little too young for the owners to say, all right, this is our guy. Even though I think Mike would do a phenomenal job. We just talked about getting the game younger, getting younger fans in the stands. I think Mike would have some great ideas to do that. So I'm just mentioning him because I think he would be phenomenal at it. And maybe his time is, 10 years away. But I think if he was installed as the commissioner tomorrow, I think there'd be some pretty cool stuff on the way. The other name that I've always thought about, maybe not always, I would say for the better part of 10 years, I kind of thought about this even before Randy Ambrosie was appointed commissioner, is Scott Mitchell, one of the head honchos, now part owner with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. His dad was a former commissioner. He's been not only in the ownership group here in Hamilton, but he's been in the broadcasting world. He is one of the driving forces, or has been one of the driving forces behind the Canadian Premier League, launching a league and seeing that grow and be successful. I think Scott Mitchell, now he would have to sell, I would assume, have to sell his shares in the Hamilton Tiger Cats or his ownership stake in the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And I'm not sure he's in a position to do that yet, but I think he would certainly be considered as a commissioner at some point, if not maybe the next one. But I think he and Bob Young and everyone else associated with the Ticats really want to, and I think at the end of the day, they really want to bring a Grey Cup to Hamilton. A lot of fans, and I'm sure many in the chat are just going to go crazy about this, is that, I'm talking about Scott here, easy target when things go bad. He's got his hand in the cookie jar, he's meddling or whatever the case is. He's an easy target. And I don't think he minds being that easy target. Kind of takes the heat off Bob Young. But I think he would do a pretty good job as commissioner. I'd like to see him try at least. Brad says Wally Bono. Wally would be an awesome commissioner. Are you kidding me? The Godfather? Nona says, repost the link, please. All right, let's do that. Let's repost the link. If you want to join me on the show, you can do so. And I'm just going to repost the link here in the chat. And blammo. Back to the chat. Ari says, let our current special teams coordinator take over the offensive line. He was very successful with that in 2018. Then bring in Mark Killam to take over special teams. So I've been reading a little bit about, and number one, I was shocked like heck that Mark Killam was released or let go in Calgary. I mean, here's one of the guys over the last decade plus, I think 12, almost 15 years now, has been one of the great special teams coordinators. Really fit that role to a T in Calgary and did it very well. Had some great players in those roles as well. But I was a big fan. So I have heard and read that he could potentially be considered for a coaching position in places like Saskatchewan, in places like Edmonton and BC. I'm not sure he's going to be the head coach in those latter two places, but he's definitely a plus for whatever coaching staff he joins. I'd love to see him in Hamilton, but I think he's going to stay in the West. Brad says maybe we could try for Grant on returns. We could offer his hair extension as a signing bonus. LOL. Janarian Grant would be a huge get. My gut says he probably re-signs in Toronto. I think Toronto, after winning the Grey Cup, I think from a front office player personnel perspective, it's an easier time re-signing those players. Unless they're, towards the end of their career and they just want to cash in because they know that this is the last deal that they're going to sign. But the fact of the matter is, you win a championship. I think the conversation is a little easier to bring those players back. I think they would want to come back to do it again, right? The feeling is so euphoric. You've won the whole thing. You finally achieved your goal. Let's do it again with the same guys, or at least as many as possible. John says, I agree. Bo should ask, but disagree. He deserves it. Didn't make the playoffs. He doesn't need to play after this year. TSN will hire him. So, and this was the argument for the most outstanding player award. Basically, Hamilton did not make the playoffs. How dare anyone vote for Bo Levi Mitchell for most outstanding player? Last I checked, the award was most outstanding player. Was it most outstanding player on the most outstanding team? And so I cast my ballot for Bo Levi Mitchell because I thought he was, no word of a lie. I went through a bunch of stats. I watched every game. I thought he was the most outstanding player. You put him against every quarterback in the league, and I thought he was better than each and every one of them. And yeah, he got benched, but he came back and in the last half of the season was the best quarterback in the league. Bo doesn't play defense. And in the first 2 months, let's say, of this season, maybe even 3, I'm not sure anyone in the quarterback position could have done any better to secure more victories than what Bo did. The defense was an embarrassment. Was anyone happy with the D? No. No one was happy with the defense. Mark Washington paid the price. Number of guys were jettisoned. They were reworking pretty much the whole roster. Didn't work. Did not work. And can you blame Bo for that? No, absolutely not. He also didn't play special teams. And the special teams was a train wreck as well for the first 6 to 8 weeks. And until Boudreau was dismissed and McKnight came in and kind of solidified that unit, finally the wheels started all turning in the same way when it came to offense, defense, and special teams. So again, to my mind, I think Bo deserves a contract of an elite quarterback, because if other guys around the league are getting paid $450,000, $500,000 plus, Bo's got to be in that conversation. It's just the math. It's fair market value, right? John, yes, hockey. Sid, the kid, great example. Take less for a ring. Chris says, need younger fans like my nephew who's 27, watches NFL to do gambling aspect of it. Yeah, the whole gambling part of it is massive. Massive. It used to be, and not long ago, that the Super Bowl was the game to bet on, because you could bet on everything under the sun. From the coin flip to the anthem length to you name it, you can bet on it. And now every game in virtually every sport has that dynamic. You can bet on player points and rebounds and hits and home runs and touchdowns, whatever the case is. And yeah, you can do it in the Canadian Football League. But have you ever checked, and I know I'm getting off topic here, but Chris brought it up. Have you ever checked and compared what you can bet on and the amount of items you can bet on in any NFL game and compare that to the Canadian Football League? It is like this. I can't reach any higher. The NFL has so much more to tantalize the appetite of the sports fan when it comes to wagering. The NFL has never hidden from the fact that they love the fact that people love to watch because they have money on the game, or the over-under, or the number of catches a receiver is going to make, or the number of rushing yards this guy's going to, whatever the case is. The CFL has it to a very slim basic standard in terms of what you can bet on. And so that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the CFL to do something to attract the younger fan. Chris also says the CFL, I just went down a little too much. Bear with me here. CFL has the perception of not being pro football. Yeah, I don't know. I don't run into too many sports fans who think that. there might be some uneducated fans who think the CFL is not pro football, but that's not the case. That's not the case. Remember Chad Ochocinco? Chad Ochocinco, Chad Johnson, former Cincinnati Bengals standout, came to the CFL, and he was with Montreal. I think most of you remember this. And a few years later, and this is after his football career had ended, he was asked about his experience in Canada. And he said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he said, my expectation was I was going to go in there and I was going to dominate. There was going to be no questions asked. I'll make the team. I'm going to be a superstar in Canada. And he said, man, those guys could play. Those guys can ball. I'm in tough here. And he was. And he was not a superstar in the CFL. It was more of a sideshow. He had some productive games here and there. He was not even close to being Chad Ochocinco. And so that's a great example of the CFL being a pro league and being a great league with great players, both Canadian and American, and as we see, a little global as well. Ari is back at it. I think Bo is going to sign a restructured contract and add another year to his contract. The way he played, there is no way he is ready to stop. Could be. Could be. Chris says the CFL needs to be a 12-team league. Wow, let's just get to 10 first. Can we just get to 10? Have one bye week in the season per team, and an even number of teams in each division. That would be great. That would be amazing. Brad says, yeah, it'd be good for Mike. Maybe he's young enough to youth up the league. Yeah, that's my thought. Bill says, is Bo potential trade bait? If there are gaps in the roster as April rolls around, could the Ticats fill a few gaps and lean on the backup Powell to lead the team? Bill, anything is possible. Anything's possible. And I think we all know that Scott Milanovich is pretty high on Taylor Powell. And I think Taylor Powell has not yet hit his ceiling. I'd love to see him get there. And I'd love to see him get there in a Ticats uniform. But I think this training camp is going to be really interesting because you have Bo, who at the start of camp this year came in a walking boot. You have Bo, who just proved to the entire league that he is still an elite level quarterback. And now you have Taylor Powell, who did not get a sniff of action after he went down with his injury. And when he came back, in a backup role, Bo basically played every snap. In fact, Tulia Tagovailoa got a couple of snaps as well. I think this training camp is going to be really interesting to see the dichotomy at the quarterback position. The room is super tight. They all get along. There's no doubt about it. I don't see that changing at all. But I can't see this team trading Bo Levi to fill some other gaps. It would have to be a really interesting trade to make sure you hit all your spots and then hope that Taylor Powell can hit his ceiling. That's just my thought. If I'm the new GM coming in, I'm not trading Bo Levi Mitchell. John says, well, if the new GM is from Winnipeg, I'm sure it will be easier to get the Winnipeg defensive free agents. Yeah, maybe. Ted Govaya and Danny McManus are, not surprisingly, really loved by a lot of the players that they interact with. That should not be a surprise as well. Ari says, please, Rick, let that happen. Okay. Your wish is my... this is Pills. Rick, the Ticats have made some minor signings lately per the CFL transactions page. Black Hilaire Frost, who's making these signings before the GM position is filled. My guess is this is probably, if it's not Orlando Steiner, it could be Drew Alamang, who was a co-assistant GM, the director of Canadian Scouting. You also have Spencer Zimmerman, Spencer's Baum. One of those three probably got the job done, or it could have been Orlando as well, or maybe even all of them to say, hey, we're going to make this deal happen. Ken says, holy cow, I never knew that Doug Mitchell was Scott's father. Yeah, absolutely so. And passed away earlier this year. Carlisle says, sup, I guess that leaves MR. There might be a comment a little later on. Brad says, Killam is on par with Reinbold as a special teams coach. Yeah, Killam had great success in Calgary. And as I said before, really surprised that Dave Dickinson kind of made that move. And maybe it was because of the season that Calgary had that he thought, drastic measures had to be taken. But I just didn't agree with that maneuver. Killam was not the issue in Calgary, that's for sure. And I have no doubt in my mind that he's going to get a job somewhere else. Bill says, agree, Rick. Bo got robbed of the MVP award. I don't know if he got robbed. Brady Oliveira had a great campaign. But the thing that I kind of, swayed my vote to Bo, and I in these kind of cases, I hate being seen as a homer because I'm voting for a guy in the city that I live in. And that was clearly not the case. I really take this voting seriously. I do a ton of research. As I mentioned, I watch all the games. The one stat that really bugged me from Brady Oliveira's, a couple of stats really, Brady Oliveira's season this year. Number one, last year he had 1,500 rushing yards, a little bit over 1,500 rushing yards. And this year, just over 1,300 rushing yards. And last year he had 9 touchdowns. This year he had 3 touchdowns. And he did not score a touchdown until it was either just before or right at Labor Day. So for half the year, he didn't even get into the end zone. I don't, most outstanding player to me, you got to be impactful from beginning to end. And when I look at Bo's stats each and every game and watch him play each and every game, he had a humongous, and obviously being the quarterback kind of helps, a humongous influence in this offense and how it scored points and how it progressed in each and every game. And at the end of the year, you kind of, get this kind of cumulative aspect of your mind going. And you look at the Ticats offense, and again, most passing yards, and by a long ways, like over 1,100 yards more than Zach Caleros, who finished second. 32 touchdowns. I think that was 8 more than McLeod Bethel Thompson in Edmonton. So like blowing everyone else out of the water, having an offense that was top 3 in the league in a number of big categories, including scoring. I think you look at that and say that, that was outstanding. So that's kind of what swayed me to vote for Bo Levi Mitchell. Brad says, first half of the season, Bo was averaging over 325 yards per game. The man did what he could. Yeah, and again, I mean, the quarterback is the most important position on a football team, whether it's the CFL, the NFL, you name the league, it's going to be it. He's the guy that's touching the ball each and every play. So if a quarterback plays great, your team has a good chance of winning. If he doesn't play great, you're probably not going to win the ball game. But in the same sense, quarterback is only in charge of the offense. So while a team may win a game, the quarterback is probably going to get, and we've mentioned this, and I'm sure many quarterbacks have said this out loud, quarterback gets way too much credit when the team wins and way too much blame when a team loses. And it's the nature of the beast nowadays. This is nothing new. Rick, or from Ari, says, Rick, how about commenting on whether you see Hamilton as potential VA destination, as some have put this out there? VA being Vernon Adams Jr. So the BC Lions, if you missed it, have said that they are trading Vernon Adams Jr. They've also said that he is not going to dictate what team he goes to. So wherever they trade him to, he'll be off to that team. I don't see Hamilton as a possible destination. This team has 4 quarterbacks under contract. One guy coming off an MOP caliber year. One guy in Taylor Powell who appears to be the future guy. Another guy in, well, I guess the final two, Talia Tagovailoa and Harrison Frost, 2 guys that are really unproven. And huge question marks. They could be stars in this league. They could be duds in this league. They're probably somewhere in between. And so to bring another guy in, I just don't see it. Right? I see Vernon Adams Jr. landing in places like Calgary, potentially Saskatchewan, right? Trevor Harris is not fully committed to what he's going to do in the future. It sounds like he wants to come back. But again, he's closing in on 40. Vernon Adams would be a huge upgrade for any team that he goes to. Calgary's option 1, Saskatchewan's option number 2, at least in my mind. And option number 3 is Edmonton, because they have Trey Ford and they have McLeod Bethel Thompson. And so let's not forget, Rick Campbell, who was in BC, could be the head coach in Edmonton. And so is he going to want Vernon Adams Jr., Trey Ford, or McLeod Bethel-Thompson, or maybe another quarterback who's out there, like a Davis Alexander in Montreal, who could be on its way out, although I think the Owls keep him and dump Cody Fajardo. We'll see. But again, BC is going to trade Vernon Adams Jr. to the team that they're going to get the best return from. So if that's Calgary, it's going to be Calgary. If it's Saskatchewan, it's going to be the Rough Riders. If it's another team, BC is going to want to maximize that trade. This is probably going to be the biggest trade that they will have made in the last number of years, right? Franchise-altering quarterback to another team. And you're going to probably trade them within the division. We'll see. That's one of the many interesting elements of this CFL offseason. John says Mitchell is an easy target because he brings it onto himself. Jerry Jones of the CFL, please go be commissioner. Yes. Ari says, would it be the best thing that's happened in Ticat football in 25 years? Oh, he's referencing John's comment. This chat is really skippy tonight. Sorry, folks. This one is from Randy. We have a good, solid QB roster now. All were re-signed. The focus needs to be on signing the top performers. And Chris says, last place non-playoff team was why he didn't win MOP. And I get it. Last place in the division, second last in the CFL, didn't make the playoffs. How can this guy be the most outstanding player? Again, he's one guy. Just one guy. Doesn't play defense, doesn't play special teams. But I get it. Chris says, Hamilton only won 3 Grey Cups in the past 52 years. 1972, 1986, 1999. Chris, thanks for the reminder. But he also says, if the Cats had made the playoffs, Bo would have won the MOP. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. If Hamilton finishes third, I don't know. Hamilton finishes third, makes the playoffs. Maybe he does. Especially the way he played in the last half of the year. By the way, since 99, I know I tweeted this out on Grey Cup night. The Argos have won 5 Grey Cups since the Ticats last won theirs. It's a head scratcher. Brad says, regardless of how many quarterbacks Hamilton has, BC wants a trade. What's a 40-year-old quarterback worth really? Well, who's 40? Vernon Adams, I believe, is 30. And I believe that Bo Levi is going to be 35 next season. 34 or 35. But if you're referencing Trevor Harris, who's 37, 38, I believe. Winnipeg is that. No one's brought up Winnipeg, but it just popped into my head because Zach Collaros is 36. You know, they've been the 5 straight Grey Cups. He's now played in 6 championships. You know, he's won 2 of them. If BC can get a good package out of Winnipeg, do the Bombers say no? It depends what the price is, I guess. I can't see BC trading Vernon Adams to Winnipeg, though. Trade him to Calgary. They're rebuilding. They're a long way off. Even with Vernon Adams on the roster, they're a long way off. Email is fifthquartershow@gmail.com. The number 5th, fifthquartershow@gmail.com. Offer your thoughts in the chat, which has been burning hot tonight, or on X. The handle is @Rick Zamperin. Use the hashtag #fifthquarter. I know a lot of people are moving to Blue Sky these days, and I'll be incorporating that fairly soon. I haven't checked it out yet. But millions of people are going to Blue Sky, so I'll probably add that in the not-too-distant future. Ken says, seems like all of a sudden there are many high-level quarterbacks in the CFL. That's very true. When you go through the list, right? Like, Winnipeg's got Zach Collaros, and there's not much after that. BC with 2, right, with Rourke and VA. Edmonton had 2 that they kind of went back and forth, McLeod Bethel-Thompson, Trey Ford. Calgary, Jake Mayer, who kind of slipped and slide this season. Montreal with Fajardo and Davis Alexander, who still has not lost a start in the Canadian Football League. Bo Levi, you might want to throw in Taylor Powell in there, although I don't think we've seen enough of him to declare him a star quarterback or a high-level quarterback in the CFL. He's getting there. He's got the tools to get there. We've seen it in flashes or in a couple of games here and there. If he can put it all together for 18 games, look out. Ticats will have something. Toronto with Chad Kelly, I know we love to hate him, but Kelly goes down with an injury, and Nick Arbuckle comes in and wins a ball game, the biggest game of the season for them. So that's great QB depth. Wouldn't say Arbuckle's a high-level quarterback. Ottawa, Drew Brown, I think is on the cusp of being there for sure. Jeremiah Masoli was there at one point. The injuries have kind of taken their toll on him. Have I missed anyone? No, I think I hit every team. Yeah, good crop of QBs in the Canadian Football League. And, any given Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday night, whatever the case is, one might kind of hop out of nowhere with a very bad game. And next week, they have a superstar kind of game. It's a funny league. It's a funny sport. That's for sure. Brad says, what's Zach worth with a missing finger? LOL. Probably not as much as he was when he was fully fit. Chris says, Hamilton hires the right people. This team can be a competitive team long term. There's no doubt about it. We saw it in 1998. Ron Lancaster comes here with Danny McManus and Darren Flutie, the three-headed monster. And they already had a really good defense. They had these two, really three when you count Coach Lancaster to the mix, three individuals to the offensive side of the ball. And I know they had some other, newcomers to the fold. But they go to the Grey Cup in 98, fall short. They go in 99, they get the job done. That 97 to 98 off season, absolutely massive. So it can be done. It's been done before. It'll be done again. Whether this team can do it this offseason to be a Grey Cup champion next year remains to be seen. Bill says, one thing I'd like about Hervey was he had a vision of building from the trenches. It paid off on the offensive line this year and interior D-line, but there was a dearth of good edge rushers in the league this year. You are 100% right. The offensive line was fantastic this year. In fact, I think it was one of the strong points of this team. And John Salavanis years ago told me, your offense is only as good as your offensive line. And so this team didn't give up a lot of sacks, was pretty productive in the run game, physical, whether they were pass blocking or run blocking. Not a lot of penalties on the offensive line, which was good. That's a strength of this team. And if they can re-sign David Beard, that's a huge plus going into the offseason or going into training camp. And on the D-line, they bring in guys like Barlow and Hendricks from Toronto. And while they were good, I think they both kind of took a step back in terms of their productivity. In 2023 in Toronto, they were awesome. And they came to Hamilton. I think there was a bit of an adjustment, certainly in the first few months. You change D coordinators, and sure, all right, you have a built-in excuse, and a pretty good one, in terms of being a volatile year. Coming into a new team, new coaching staff, new scheme. DC gets changed mid-year. I get it. I want to see what these guys can do in 2025, especially if you can add in more talent on that D line. Who those guys are, I don't know. There's a lot of good players out there to bring in via free agency. John says, Rick, your stats might be correct, but people still believe you need at least led your team into the playoffs to be called MOP. Yeah, listen, I get it. John, I get it. If you don't make the playoffs, it's a massive knock against that player. And even making it to, and I kind of had my doubts that Bo would get enough votes even to be the Eastern nominee for most outstanding player, but he did, went to the awards show. I think had a phenomenal season. Chris says, good show, Rick. Hey, thanks, Chris. Ken says, on a percentage of available seats sold, the Tiger Cats are probably right up there. They don't get enough credit for this. Are we talking about fandom? Because Hamilton is a phenomenal football town. Win or lose, you guys and gals show up every game day. And while it might not be sold out when times are tough, the hardcore fans are always there. The face paint's on, the flags are flying, the Oski Wee Wee is loud and proud. Win, lose, or draw, the diehards are always there. And that group of diehards has grown over the years. We know that. And, having a was going to say sparkling new stadium, but it's 10 years old already. Having a newer facility compared to Ivor Wynne, which was a fantastic stadium, but we can all admit was long in the tooth and it needed to be replaced. Even though Ticats fans for decades had some phenomenal memories at Old Ivor Wynne. Having a newer venue, right, with more amenities, having a better team on the field to cheer for the last number of years, I think has all helped kind of grow that fan base and that fandom. The other part of the equation is the thirst, the hunger, the hunt, the chase, being on the prowl, running out of these stupid puns, to get to the Grey Cup. Not winning a championship since 1999. When this team gets good, and I'm talking about over 500, I'm talking about like 2019, you're 15-3. There's nothing like being in Hamilton on a game day or leading up to a big game, whether it's Labor Day or against a big opponent. The buzz in the city is palpable, right? You can kind of taste what's at stake. And I think the fandom in Hamilton is off the charts, especially when the team is going good, winning ball games and being competitive and scoring points and tough, hard-nosed, blue-collar, lunch bucket defensive play and some special stuff on special teams. I mean, I'm getting charged up about 2025 because I want to see all this stuff kind of transpire. And if it does, look out. This city is ready to explode. Pills says, Ken, you're totally right. The fan base is so dedicated. Yep, absolutely. And, you could say this for all 9 teams in the CFL. There's a great core of fans for all 9 CFL teams. But it's incumbent on the teams and certainly the commissioner to kind of really start to grow that and get those fair weather fans to become hardcore fans or maybe semi-hardcore fans. There's some steps in this evolution. But I think the league is really heading in a good direction. It has been for a number of years. Yes, it has some financial difficulties, and let's face it, it probably always will to a certain degree because it's competing against other sports that are on a different, echelon in terms of financials. But we love the CFL. We love the rules, most of the rules. We love the game. We love the players. We love the memories that we've built in association with the teams that we cheer for or the ones that we cheer against. So, yeah, we just, as a league, we got to harness that and curate it and grow it. Brad, 200 more puns on the D-line would help a lot. Chris says, loyal fan base, 2021 Cats should have won the cup. Yeah, don't get me started on that one. And Chris says, Argos have a solid core fan base as well. And, as Ticats fans, and I'll speak for all Ticats fans here, and you can certainly add your comments in the chat on this too, is that we love to hate the Argos, but we also want the Argos to succeed in the stands as well. Because that's just a healthier league. It adds to a much more fun or funner rivalry between Hamilton and Toronto, right? Think of the best Labor Days or the best road trips to Toronto that you've ever taken. The crowd size plays a part in the excitement. The bigger the crowd, the bigger the buzz, the bigger the calls back and forth. That's what makes this rivalry so fun. It's when both fan bases are big and rowdy and just going at each other in a good sense, not throwing batteries or throwing punches. That's what makes sports a lot of fun. Interaction between fans as well. Chris says CFL needs Argos to be successful. Yes, in the stands, 100% agree, Rick. And Fear the Conspiracy says, go Argos. Yeah, I guess congratulations to the Argos for winning again. We'll get there, Ticats fans. We will get there. All right, it is 9:25. I'm just going to check out all the different platforms that we have, X and email and the chat. I don't see any new commentary. But I will say this. Earlier this week, we launched 2 new features on the Fifth Quarter Show. We had on Tuesday and every Tuesday during the off season, Fifth Quarter Show Seasons, as I look back at some of the amazing seasons and amazing years that this franchise has realized. So you can check that out. Episode 1 has already been published. You can check it out in the Fifth Quarter Show Seasons playlist. And yesterday and every Thursday during the off season, it's going to be the Fifth Quarter Show Legends. I look at some of the legendary figures from the past. And episode 1 yesterday was Angelo Mosca. Phenomenal career, unbelievable individual, one of only 3 Ticats players to have his number retired, made a huge impact even after his playing days in this city. I thought it was just fitting that we start with probably the most recognizable figure in Ticats history. The meanest man in the CFL, was a great guy in the wrestling ring as well. What a phenomenal life he had and a lasting legacy he's left not only on this sport, but on this city and in this country as well. So check it out. Fifth Quarter Show Seasons every Tuesday, Fifth Quarter Show Legends every Thursday. And listen, when breaking news happens, when the GM is hired, when free agents are signed or whatever the case is, if it's a notable free agent, I'll fire up the Fifth Quarter Show and we can have a discussion about that, or maybe I'll just riff for a few minutes on my thoughts on whatever the news of the day is. So keep it locked on and locked in to the Fifth Quarter Show. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Give this video and others a like. Let's get the conversation a bit bigger. Love to see it. More new things coming up in the new year as well when it comes to the Fifth Quarter Show in 2025. Should be a lot of fun. Chris says it will happen in Hamilton in terms of the Grey Cup. Sam says, why is the Grey Cup going to the West the next 3 years? Well, I think, it was in Hamilton in 2021 and 2023. I know it was in Saskatchewan. Was it 2022, right? BC 2024. It's going to be in Winnipeg next year, then Calgary in 2026. I think by 2027, it should probably come back to the East. No, they already decided 2027. I don't think so. But I know places like Edmonton certainly want it again. But I would say, yeah, let's bring it back to the East as well, whether it's Ottawa or Toronto. I know Montreal hasn't had it a long, long time. The Big O's not an option, but that would be a great place to have it for sure. Humans Suck says, happy silver anniversary, 25 years without a cup. Toronto has won it 5 times in that time frame. Yep. I already mentioned that. Thanks for the reminder, though. John says, off to bed. Thanks, Rick. This is so great. Keep it up. Nobody in the CFL East is doing these shows. So great. Thank you. Bill says, yes, Argos have a strong but small fan base. Saw them both attending the Grey Cup tally on the news. Brad says, Moscow, wee wee. Chris says, thanks, Rick. Toronto can't bid on it until after the World Cup. Oh, that's right. 2026 World Cup. Yes. Toronto 2016, Montreal 2008. Toronto or Montreal will probably be a good bet for the next Grey Cup in the East. I would think so. And they would do a fine job in hosting as well. All right, let's wrap it up. CFL free agency, I know, is a couple months away. It'll happen in February. The GM role, I'm sure, will be filled in the next couple of weeks when it happens. I'll certainly offer my take on it, maybe get yours as well. Enjoy the off-season. Enjoy the Fifth Quarter Show Seasons and Legends every Tuesday and Thursday, respectively. Have an awesome night and a fantastic weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Oski wee wee.